¿Probando? Listo. Gracias. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our second session of the day. We're super excited to be presenting today the Women Matter Mexico 22 study for all of you. We're very excited to have none other than Valentina Ibarra, one of the co-authors of this study. And Valentina is a partner at McKinsey, actually the Mexico City office of McKinsey. Valentina is actually the first female partner in that office, and we're super proud to have her. And Valentina is actually a specialist in oil and gas, and she has an incredibly great transactional resume, and she's an expert in the oil and gas sectors, and she's constantly doing deals all over the world and working with huge companies all over while being the mother of two, while being a wife, while having just a baby that today turns 3 months old, and this is the first time that Valentina is venturing out to make a presentation. That is how much she wants to spread the word and be a part of our efforts to make everyone know what we're having. Valentina is a lawyer and an economist by the CIDE, and she also has a graduate degree at Darden and has been joined SAI Consultores for a long while in doing actually antitrust work, so at SAI Consultores, and now she's been with McKinsey for 7 years, where on top of everything that I just said, Valentina is championing the diversity and inclusion initiatives, including non-paid work, as using all the methodology that she already does as a consultant for the very important issue of Women Matter. So it sounds like an obvious statement, Valentina. We would assume that women matter, but still we have to make a point of it, and you devote great resources to show with numbers why women matter, and you devote a lot of your time and effort to using very strict data to show the benefits of including the women in the workforce, and to giving what we get most asked for, all of us that work in these matters: what can I do? What do I do? What can have impact? What will make me, what will give me bang for my buck if I spend money, resources, or devote people for this? Is that going to work? Is that actually going to help? So this is what you're going to be talking to us today. Please give the floor to, I give the floor to Valentina Ibarra. Welcome, Valentina.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cristina, and thank you, everybody, for having me. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here, so thank you so much. Congratulations for such a huge milestone. I'm a lawyer myself, as Cristina just said, so I fully appreciate your profession, and thank you for having me. So I'm going to stand up to try to keep it, because it's a long slideshow. So, and I believe that we're going to have some time at the end for questions, but if you have a burning question, then let Cristina know, and we can absolutely pause and do that.
Yeah, sorry, there will be microphones. I understand that they will pass, so that in case anybody needs to make a question, so that our viewers online are going to be able to listen to it, but you can also use our streaming chat to ask questions, and we will get them from. And if it's from here, you can just let me know. We'll write it down and give Valentina a chance to answer your questions.
Perfect.
So go ahead.
Thank you. So first of all, a huge disclaimer. Cristina already said I'm only one of 5 co-authors of the study. They could not be here, unfortunately, but I am here on their behalf, and hopefully I can present to you what we did jointly, and if anything goes wrong, then I'll blame them for not being here.
Exactly.
But thank you so much. So let me start just by giving a brief introduction of what is Women Matter and why do we do this at McKinsey. So we've been doing this kind of reports and this type of research since 2007. So it's been 15 years now that we devote our time to this very important topic. And the reason why we do that, I mean, we have many reasons, but a couple of very good reasons. First of all, it's just a matter of moral principle and social justice. But also, very importantly, it's a matter of business. We truly believe that there is a business case around gender diversity, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that's why it is a very pressing topic for our clients as well. So that's why we devote so much time to researching this topic and to publish work around it. We first started doing with a global nature, but then we very quickly understood that there was some benefits in doing more granular work, so we started doing regional studies. And then at some point we decided, hey, looks like it is very country-specific, so we started doing it country by country. So some of the pioneering countries in doing this were Spain, the US, Turkey, and so on. And in Mexico, it was only 2018 when we launched the first edition of Women Matter. This is the second edition, the one that I'm about to talk about. And we decided to do it again because was the first study of its nature in Mexico. And I believe that it really set the foundations of what is the situation of professional women in our country. And we wanted to do a second edition so that we can understand what is the progress or the lack of progress that we've seen in the past few years. So that's why we do Women Matter. Very quickly in terms of methodology, and allow me a couple of slides to tell you what we did and what's the study about. So, first of all, we had 150 companies, and I said 150 because 30 of them are subsidiaries in Latin America, but 120 of them are companies in Mexico. And I'm talking about the biggest companies in the country because they employ more than 1 million people, these companies jointly. And in sales, they represent like 35% of GDP. So they're big companies in the country. And this is very relevant because in our first edition of the study, we had 50 companies, 50. So now, not only did we have repeat companies, like 90% repeat companies joining this part of the study, but we also included another 80 companies. So that is from the standpoint of methodology. Now, the survey that we launched had 3 parts to it. First, it had a talent census. Then a survey on the policies and processes that companies are using in order to recruit, retain, and promote women. And then finally, we had an employee survey. So the first 2 were directly answered by the human resources department of the companies that joined the study. But the last one was directly filled out by the employees of these companies, both men and women. The reason why we did that is it was important to us to understand not only what companies believe they're doing towards gender diversity and gender parity, but more importantly, what is the feeling of their employees about this important topic, whether they feel that their companies are doing something about it, whether they feel included, and so on, which is why we included. And we received more than 80,000 responses from employees. So between those 2, that's how we created the study and the data that I'm about to show. Besides, we had one-on-one interviews with the CEOs of most of these companies, and then we had roundtables with members of their C-suite and their CHROs. The reason for that is that data can tell you so much, but then you really have to understand from the conversations of the people who work there and the people who create those policies, what exactly are they doing about it. So that's from the standpoint of methodology, but let's deep dive into content. What are the differences between this second edition and the first edition that we did? So first I have a few good news. Let me start with the good news. So I was telling you earlier that there's a business case behind gender diversity. And when I say that, we do have data that shows that correlation. And what you can see in this graph is that there's the bottom quartile in black, the companies who are in the bottom quartile in terms of number of women in senior positions. And we compare the financial performance to those of the top quartile. And again, top quartile of women in senior positions. And what we can see is that in 2014, there was a 15% of more likelihood or more probability of those companies having a better financial performance than companies who were in the bottom quartile. When we reran this in 2017, that probability had increased to 21%. When we reran that in 2019, that had increased already to 25%. So again, the business case is growing stronger. And when I say financial performance, we ran this analysis with any metric of financial performance that you can think of. We did ROIC, we did EBITDA, we did economic value added, like any metric that you can think of, and it holds. The relationship holds. There is a business case around it. So I always urge people to say, if you don't care about this topic because of its nature and its intrinsic value in terms of moral justice, principle, and so on, you should at least care about it because there's money on this. There's significant money. So I'd like a show of hands of who wouldn't want to have 25% more likelihood of having a better performance than your peers if you were to employ and retain more women in your workforce. So first, good news is it's getting stronger and stronger, the business case. Now, second good news, it looks like companies are becoming more aware and more committed to the topic of gender diversity and gender parity. So here is what we had in the previous study. So half of the companies in Mexico in 2018 had the women parity topic amongst the top 10 priority. Now, in 2020, which is the latest study that we did, that became like 3/4 of the companies believe that it is not believe, but declare to have it amongst their top 10 priority. And not only that, but as you can see, in 2017, there was 9% of companies who didn't even have it on their agenda. Let's not say that it was a priority, it was not even in their agenda. But by 2020, this number reduced to only 4% of companies. So it is almost like a double effect on gaining more priority, but also even joining the conversation as part of what is the agenda. And the other good news is that now almost half of the companies in Mexico have diversity committees, which was not the case a few years back. And this is important because unless you have a committee that is specifically focused in trying to solve these issues, then it is very difficult to actually solve them. So that's the second good news.
Valentina, I think it's pertinent for everybody here to know that actually González Calvillo is part of this second group. Now, we do have gender diversity and gender parity within our top commitments, but also now we have a diversity committee. So just for everyone to know, most of our staff are aware of this, but I think that it's really interesting that this was used to be the case for very large companies like the ones you described in the study, but that service providers that had been not as pressured from a marketing perspective are now part of this effort, including, of course, us.
That's great to know, because it is true that it was not the case before, and it is becoming more and more the case now. I'll talk a little bit about, later on, about the importance and how do you put together that committee, because it really depends on how do you put together that committee on the effectiveness of that committee, but at least having one is already good news. So this was the second good news that I had in terms of what is the progress or the development since last study. If we go to the third good news, it has to do with the sentiment of their employees, the employees of these same companies. So now the employees, 80% of employees say, my organization is committed to the topic of gender diversity versus 68% in the previous study. So they believe, they have also more awareness, not only the company has more awareness, but the actual employees believe that the companies are actually more committed to the topic. Also, they believe more now than they did before, that there's a relationship between gender diversity and the business case that I was saying before, the financial performance. Because for some reasons, everybody had this on their back page of social and corporate responsibility and so on. But the moment it starts getting on the agenda, the actual business, then people start listening. And now the fact that employees also recognize that relationship is very important. And not only that, but they also recognize the importance for the organizational health of companies. So it's not only about being better financially and outperforming your peers, but it's actually being a better place to work. And now 60% of employees believe that diversity contributes to a better organizational place or a better organizational health. So those are the good news. Unfortunately, not everything is good news. So I'm going to turn to what are the bad news in terms of progress. So let me first explain what's the graph that you're looking at. So this is the corporate funnel in Mexico. It goes from entry level all the way to CEO and the different positions across the corporate ladder. And the numbers that you can see here are the percentage of women that we have in the different positions. So first, the average participation of women in Mexico in their workforce is 38%. Of course, this is only of the companies that I told you, which is formal work, of course, formal job. So 38%. But when we look at this number, it is very skewed by the first steps of the ladder, right? We see entry level 40% and then managers 37%. But as we go up the corporate ladder, we see that it starts declining steeply. That is bad news because I was telling you earlier that the business case associated to gender diversity is associated precisely to the more senior levels of the corporate ladder. So to the extent that we cannot increase the number of women that we have in these ladder steps, then we will not be able to capitalize on the benefits that I was mentioning before, which is why it is very important. And as we can see, the first bad news is we're not keeping women across the whole chain. We're only keeping them at the beginning. And even at the beginning, we don't have that many women, right? Like, if we are 50% of the population, why are we only recruiting 40% of women at the entry level? And not only that, but in Mexico, we have more women, graduate women, coming out of university than men. So not even companies can argue the fact that we don't have enough talent pool where to recruit from. Actually, you all do, and we all do, but we are not as a society being able to recruit them and to retain them. So again, we start with a handicap already with 40%. Then the first fall, like very, very important fall, it's at the level of senior managers. And that tends to be when women start having families and start having children. So that's why they start exiting in such large numbers the workforce. And the second one is at the level of senior VPs. Like, of course, there's a fall throughout the chain, but I'm just mentioning the ones that are very steep. So the other one is at the senior VP level. So the other bad news, and if I just click another one, this number here is the percentage change in each of these steps from the previous study. So as we can see, there has been some progress, but that progress is very marginal. We're talking about 3 to 4% in the best of cases, but we have some cases, such as a C-suite, in which we have no progress whatsoever, or in senior VPs, in which we actually are worse off today than we were a few years back. This means we have now less women than we had in those positions a few years back. Notwithstanding, I just told you that supposedly these companies are more committed to the topic, and employees are more aware of it, and notwithstanding, it's actually not happening in reality. We are not retaining more women, or at least not at the rate that we would like to. So
before we go on, I just wanted to comment, as you know, that El CIDE has made a study specific to the legal profession, and it follows very much this trend.
Yep.
So it's not exclusive, but specifically what you were mentioning, in the legal profession, actually, more than half of the graduates are female. Yep. So that is a good point. We also want to point out that actually at our firm, we do have at least half of our entry-level people being women, but we do see throughout the chain, and that it goes diminishing until 11% at the partnership level, specifically at our firm, but that is well above the national average for law firms. And also that we see this drop that is tied to maternity, but not to paternity. So we're not seeing the exact same change in career path when it's children that are incorporating to males' families, but only to females' families. So I don't know if you could touch a little bit upon this, because these are big companies that have maternity leaves, paternity leaves, but we still see that by the time that you're studying. I don't know if you could comment a little bit of that.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say more when we get to the initiatives, but let me stop because I think it's a very relevant question. So of course, but let's get started by saying that even companies who have paternity leaves, most companies in Mexico at least do not match the maternity leaves, right? So that's first problem, is the length of the maternity leave continues to be very different than the length of the paternity leave. So that's problem number one. But even companies, we have actually like a few companies part of this study that did that. They matched the length of the maternity leave with the paternity leave, and still they were not capitalizing on the benefits. And when we started digging deeper, we saw that it's because men don't take paternity leaves. Even though they have it, they do not take it because it's not what they're used to. And that's a huge problem that we need to solve for. And for example, in McKinsey, we have that problem. We have not matched it yet, but we have, I believe, one of the largest or lengthiest paternity leaves in the industry. And still, we don't get our partners to take it, or our associates, or anybody to take it. They take 2-3 weeks, and that's it. They go back to work. So unless you can even that playing field so that both men and women live for the same length of time, there will always be like this stigma on your head that you are living versus your peer, your men peer who's not living. So that's one of the reasons why, unless you make it like a compelling case to take it, or actually you make it mandatory, then men will typically not take that paternity leave, and especially in places like Mexico, where there's a huge cultural, let's say, bias towards what are the role models that people have to do, men versus women, and what is a role that they have to play at home, not only in terms of taking care of home, but of their children. Does that answer?
Absolutely, and I think that that's exactly what we see, that men tend not to take their paternity leaves, but also, and that's not in the legal profession specifically, but a lot of men that take leaves use that time to advance their careers rather than to devote time to child caring or bearing, and that's not only at babies at the very initial, but throughout their lives. So that those leaves are mostly taken by women, and women do have to take them fully.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then a couple of last things that I'll call out on this slide is, if we look, for example, at the C-suite, we have 10% women. So that is a very difficult number to think about, because that is a very lonely position to be in. Like, if you are one of those companies, or you are a woman in one of those companies, and you are that part of the 10%, then you are extremely lonely. And in order to actually, again, capitalize on the benefits that I was telling you about, which is diversity of thought, coming up with a more robust answer to things, because we think differently. It's not that we think better than men, we just think differently. And thinking differently creates a more robust answer to whatever it is that you're trying to solve for. So if you have only 10% women, and you're thinking about a C-suite or a committee might have like 10 people on it, you are talking about having one woman sitting on your board. One woman is not, even though she might be like Supergirl, is not able to change things. One woman by herself. So the case here is, how do we really push this towards being a number that can actually move the needle? So that was the one call out, and then the other one is, it's impressive that in Mexico, there's only 1 in 10 CEOs in Mexico is a woman. And ask me how many of those are Mexican women, then that number goes down very, very quickly. Okay, so second bad news is the pay gap. The pay gap remains from the last version of this study. So what we have,
Sorry, Valentina. Why, just a comment, why is it so important that you have the same time in paternity leave than in maternity leave?
Because, think about it if you are recruiting for your own team. If you're recruiting for your own team, you're a general manager, whatever, and you want to say, hey, I'm going to assemble this team for making this deal, and I can choose between a man and a woman. And I know that both of them are going to go on paternity and maternity leave. It's very different to say, hey, you're leaving for a couple of weeks, I can take care of that, and I'll put another associate to do your work for a couple of weeks, versus you are leaving for 3 months. So there's always a bias to try to have more men in your teams. And I'm saying this is a super unconscious bias. People, at least don't normally think out loud, hey, I'm not doing this because I want to be like a bad boss or anything. No, people don't think about it that way. But there's a bias to say, what am I going to do if she leaves 3 months? 3 months is the whole deal. She can be away the whole deal. Versus 2, 3 weeks, I can take care of that. So the reason why it's important, again, is because it levels the playing field. If you're going to leave the same amount of time than she's going to leave, then I start making decisions out of merits, instead of contextual decisions such as she's leaving 3 months, he's leaving 2 weeks. It's who is the better associate to do this, or partner, or whatever you're talking about. So it really leads you to the core of the decision in terms of recruiting for talent, and not for what is the personal situation of this employee versus that other employee. Does that resonate? More or less.
More or less.
Of course, no, but if we have time, we can.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
More or less, it sounds like something you need to consider, but I don't necessarily see the huge importance of finishing, maybe I don't see that it would make a huge difference if you force the men to have a 3-month paternity leave, whether they want it or not.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I really like this kind of push because it really helps us to try, bring more data to this. So we actually run, and as I said at the beginning, we ran this analysis in many countries, and there is data that evidences the fact that countries where the paternity leave is equal or lengthier, let's say, than the normal legal, let's say, benefit that you have, tend to have better, let's say, results in terms of gender parity. So that's one. Second, when they make it compelling or mandatory, then it also has more, you have more women on those positions. And then, in this type of countries, like say, like all the Netherlands and so on, where they actually have a very interesting setup. It's not like I give you 3 months if you're a woman and 3 months if you're a man. It's I give you a year that you can, amongst the couple, and you can split it out with your couple the way you'd like, but they put some like locks to it, so that we don't end up having a woman taking the full year and then the man not taking any. Those tend to be even better, because to your point, it's not about force-fitting a number of weeks that you have to take, because there's no magic number. I can tell you that, like right now, my baby just turned 3 months. Thanks God, I have 7 months in McKinsey of maternity leave, because I would not be ready to go back. I have friends in McKinsey that actually have gone back at 3 months, so it's a very personal situation, and when you include men there, then it becomes even more complex, right? Because then it really depends in, is it a good time for me to take paternity leave now? I am in the middle of a deal, like it would really jeopardize my career. So it's not about force-fitting, again, a number of weeks, either to men or women, but it's trying to give flexibility to both, and recognizing the fact that being a parent, it's complicated for both, and that we as companies have to provide all the elements that they need in order to do that work, very difficult work, in the most efficient way. So does that help again? No.
Valentina, if you allow me there, just one extra comment on this. There's a lot of data showing that men that actually spend their paternity leaves at home get more engaged with children and housework, and that tends to change the way they work throughout time, so that, so that that really helps throughout careers, because it's not only those 3 months. If somebody takes 3 months for a personal leave not to do childcare or housework, the impact is very different than if it's that, because they get involved with their families in a different way, and then it's hard just when your time is up to say, okay, here's the kids, I'm forgetting about them, I'm going back to work, which is what happens if you only take the day of the birth and then you go back to the office. There's no engagement. So there's a lot of data to support that paternity leaves are the most effective, one of the most effective interventions that can be made to level the play field and to engage men not only in child caring, but in householding generally.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, Cristina, because that was the other thing that I was going to say, that there's the other side of the equation. And actually at McKinsey, not in Women Matter, but in other studies, and also on Harvard Business Review, there's a lot of data, as Cristina was mentioning, of the benefits of actually doing that, because it increases the involvement of parents, like with the kids. And we always think, oh, even if I stay as a father, I spend more time with my kids. Like if the kid falls or whatever, they still call out for mom. There are very interesting studies in which you have both mom and dad present, in which the kid says either mom or dad whenever they fall. Like it goes to that point, to saying it is not true that children go to their mothers because that's their nature. No, they go to whomever provides care. And if that happens to be the father, or equally the father or the mother, then the child will be like
indifferent.
Indifferent in whether the mother or the father provides that. So that's the other benefit, which goes beyond like what I'm saying, right? Like if any of this helps to actually change the way we think about the way that we are raising our own families, I mean, this is a very good side effect for companies, but that would really, and I don't want to sound cheesy here, but that would really change the world, right? Like if we really change the way that we are thinking about our own families and how do we raise them, then that would be the very important thing.
And coming to the point, that has an effect here, right? Like this huge gap has to do with the expectation of women's availability. So I don't know if you can talk to us a little bit about
I was
this.
going to start then with this slide, but first, like any more questions about that? Like, no? Okay, we'll have more time at the end, but thank you for that. So again, I was saying that this is the data from 2017 of the pay gap, right? So it went from entry-level 8% difference of pay, so less 8% women than men, all the way to 22% in C-suite, 22% less for the mere fact of being a woman. And of course, the way that we did this analysis is that it is about same companies, right? We're not we're not comparing this company to that other company. So this gap is the average, but we did this intra-companies, so to make it comparable, apples to apples, right? So again, this was the data in 2017. Then we reran this analysis in 2020, and this is what we got. So yeah, I mean, a slight improvement from 8 to 7%, and then a slightly better improvement at the C-suite level from 22 to 17%, but it's still 17%. So it's a very similar message to the one that I was giving you before, in which there seems to be some progress, but that progress is very marginal, or it is not going at the rate that we would like it to go.
Especially because C-suite women are not having babies at that precise time, so it's what they've been lagging for a while, right?
No, and again, because I think the babies is one of the facts in general for the career and the funnel that I was presenting before, but it's not about babies, because if that were the case, then women who have no babies then would not have this problem, and still they have that problem. Right? So it's about cultural biases. It's about opportunities. It's about the rate of promotion. One of those, of course, it's life and the fact that we are the one who bear children. So, of course, it has another layer of complexity on top of it, but it's not the only thing, right? So, again, very, very similar message. Some progress, but very marginal. Which leads me to the next slide, which is, I believe, the most important slide, or one of the most important slides of the presentation, which is, how long will it take us to actually get there and to have 50% women where we want? So let me explain first what we did. So we took the average of the percentage of females in the last 3 positions of the corporate ladder that I was telling you, so in the most senior positions. And that number in 2017 was 13.4%. In 2020, that percentage is 13.9%, so this implies a compound annual growth of 1.3%. So if we keep this rate of growth in terms of progress very marginal, how long would it take us to get to the 50%? So to turn this number into 50% of female in senior positions, and the mathematical answer to that question is 100 years. So let me repeat that, 100 years. I mean, it's completely unacceptable. That means that none of us here in this room, none our children, none our grandchildren are going to live in a world where they see that there's gender parity in the workforce. So I don't know you, but I think that's completely unacceptable, and that we as society, as companies, have the obligation to do something about it. And I assure you that we're going to get there, and that's going to be the latter part of the presentation. Yes?
One question. Having the new generations with a totally different view of things would not expedite that, because new generations are all focused on that. They will eventually reach senior positions, and will that expedite the growth process and reduce that 100-year gap?
Thank you so much for that question. Because the answer to that, unfortunately, is no.
No.
We had, no, but thank you, because we tend to think about that. We tend to think about, oh yeah, this is the older problem. Like whenever the old people die, then this is going to get solved by itself, because like younger people are more progressive and they are going to do something about it. Well, if we think that way, then we're not going to change. And I'll tell you why. We ran, because of that precise question, we ran another, unfortunately it's not here, but if you download the full study, you'll see that graph. But there's a very important analysis that we did in which we ran what is the gender bias that we have by age, right? And it looks incredibly funny, the graph. So it looks like this. So it has it goes from high to low and then from high to low. So it's very low on the middle, where you have how much bias you have versus how old you are. So this means that if you are old, indeed, you have more gender bias than younger people. And it starts going down, like the gender bias. But at some point, it starts going up. So the younger and youngest of people think very similar to how old people think, which is super counterintuitive. Like, I didn't expect to see that. But when we saw the data, was like, why is this happening? And that's why we ran some of the roundtables that I was mentioning and so on. And we did some of the interviews with the employees and so on. And what we found out is that it actually has to do with the fact that some of the younger, but not youngest generations were actually part of the struggle, right? Like, I can think of myself as one of those. Like, I think, like, I was being told about this all the time. Like, you have to do this, you cannot quit. You have to be a mother and not quit McKinsey. Like, I was part of it because we were trying to make our way. When you are in the youngest part of the equation, you came into a world where you didn't think it was that big of a deal because people were voting already, like women were voting already. You saw some women in your, like maybe not a lot of partners, but you saw a couple of partners there. So it starts becoming like less of an awareness, like you have less awareness of the importance of the topic. So we, particularly in Mexico, I have to say that the analysis that I'm telling you about was in Mexico. Maybe if we ran this in another country, it might be different. But in Mexico, at least what we saw is, if you're in the youngest side of the equations and you have not gone through this struggle yourself, then you'll start thinking naturally, because of the cultural biases that we have in Mexico and how conservative we are about the roles that men and women should play in society, then you start going back to think about how your grandparents thought or your great-grandparents.
There's something else, Valentina, that I don't know if you've seen, but I've seen it in other studies, that it's part is role modeling, so that a lot of the younger generation look up on how they want to be when they grow older, and it's their bosses, they're modeling their careers after, so that they assume that that's part of what it takes. But also that what has changed very little for the younger generation is that at home, they are seeing their mothers do most of the caretaking. So what they see and what younger women see is that older women, as myself and many other women of my generation, are struggling so hard to make it work that they don't want it for themselves. Yeah. They, like what we were talking before in the previous panel, that a lot of the younger people do not want to have a career that requires you to work 12, 14, or 16 hours a day. Yeah. They don't want, women do not want to have a career that implies so much struggle, so that a lot of women are denying themselves a path of growth, saying that is not what I want to be when I grow up. I don't want that life. I don't want the costs that it implies, so that we're having there a double whammy where they were taken care of by their mothers, so that they still assume that parenting is a female issue. And your study begins with the value, if you can talk a little bit about the global survey of values, where both men and women of all ages declare that women are better taken care of by that babies are better taken care of by their mothers, and both men and women think that, and both young and old think that take caring is a female thing. So as long as that remains, the path to growth looks like it will belong.
Yeah, for sure. And the other.
Sorry, there's another question there, Alex. Sure, go ahead. No. That Alex Padres, please.
Yeah, I had a quick question for you. I was having a conversation the other night, and it sort of struck me as, oh my God, another moment. How do we deal in these hopefully less than 100 years with the notion that men, particularly straight men, feel threatened by the notion that we are proactively seeking to create gender and minority parity across our workforces? Because the comment was, this person said, as a man, I need to be careful now about what's happening. And I just thought, you don't need to be careful. But, that is the cultural perception. How do we battle that as part of this solution?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So, and we'll come to that when we talk about the initiatives, but let me pause and answer your question, because I think it's a very relevant one. And I think, like, the way that we deal at least with it, or that we suggest we deal with it, is that let's not treat this, again, as something like quotas that we need to fill. Like, that is an absolute, in our view, like an absolute mistake. Not only for men, but actually for women. Like, who wants to be promoted for the mere fact of being a woman? Like, that does not work for anybody. It just creates more, it hurts more than it helps. So to your question, I think the way that we battle that is that let's not think about this. And I always urge people, but it's very difficult, but I always urge people to think about this topic from the standpoint of talent. This is less about gender, it's more about talent. Now, the reason why we push to have more women is because if we are 50% of a population, and we believe that talent, as anything else in nature, has a normal distribution, then we're missing out of talent if we don't recruit at least 50% of our workforce being women. We are really letting talent on the table. So again, this might be different number because we don't have 50% of other minorities. I don't want to call women minorities because we are not.
We're not.
We are half, right? But of other diversities where we don't have 50 and 50, then that might be the case. But again, my belief would be that the way to treat that would be it's less about having quotas or minimal things that you have to comply with and more focusing on the talent. And if you do that, then men don't have to be scared. Like we all have to be, because we all have to be at par in terms of talent. But then everybody has the same struggle, not only men. It's like, if it becomes about talent, then everybody should be focused on how do I become the most talented person in my organization versus being a man, versus being a woman, versus being gay, versus being black, or whatever other diversity you want to call. Does that help?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, good. Yes?
It is true that quotas exist, right?
It is true that, oh yeah, that quote is.
They are designed for leveling the field.
Yeah.
So what's your position on that, about quotas? Because I've heard different
Yeah, you're
views
right.
on the topic, and
Yeah,
so
you're right. It's absolutely not a solved debate. Like, it continues to be debated, and people have different views about it. I am telling you about the view that we have at McKinsey, which could be wrong, but that's the way that the view that we have at McKinsey, which is we don't believe in that, not even for leveling the playing field. And again, the reason for that is because we believe it creates more harm than what it helps. The reason for that, again, is because then you miss out on talent. If you really promote or bring somebody on board or recruit a person for whatever other reason that is not their intrinsic talent, then again, you're not capitalizing on the benefits that I was mentioning before. You're only filling a quota. But the mere fact that you are a woman or you're gay or, again, black or whatever other diversity you're talking about, and you're not focusing on what is this person going to contribute to my organization in terms of talent, in terms of their skills, then you're not making the right choice for your company. That's our viewpoint. So even though it might help to get faster to this number, the, let's say, side effects of doing that from the business standpoint, and even from the personal standpoint, like people, in that case, and going back to the question, are going to resent you. If you were promoted not because you're the most talented person in the team, but because I am a woman, then people are going to resent me. And not only that, then I'm not going to fit. Because if all of a sudden I need to sit in a board where I don't have the skills to have the level of debate that the board is having, then the only one that is going to have a terrible time is myself. Of course, the board too, because they're going to have somebody that is not prepared. But like the worst of all is going to be the woman sitting on that board having no skills to have the right debate or the right level of conversation. So that's why, at least, again, it's not a solved issue. We have many examples of countries that use that as a way to get there, and then when they get there, they start solving for other issues. Our viewpoint is that we should never, let's say, use that technique because it creates more harm than what it helps. Does that help?
thank you.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Thank you.
Valentina, just to point out on that and just to have a little bit of the side, the benefit of quotas for many organizations is that talent, of course, is out there, but also it's grown. And I think that we've seen it a lot in family companies where the kids in the family are just there and they start grooming there. They pick one of the children of the family, typically the oldest, but it can be whomever in the family, and they teach him to be a leader. So that a lot of what quotas are there for, it's to groom some people, not to choose just like one random woman, but the most talented woman or the most talented gay man or the most talented black person to fit into the organization and groom them to growth. But if you leave talent alone while you're carrying with all the existing biases and all the existing structural issues, there may come that the talent pool comes from the same place. And part of this, just I'm going back to the presentation, but as you know, the U.S. Supreme Court is treating right now the affirmative action matters for Harvard that are based on racial equity, and this is exactly being discussed right now. There are some side effects of quotas, but there's another side effect of not having any specific intervention to groom the talent that you need to foster diversity. So of course this is not solved, and I think that we need for another time to have a debate on quotas that we can all access, because it's a very important point, but you will not start seeing the diverse role models and you will not start seeing all this sometimes if you don't help the system a bit, and if you don't make it, as you said, one woman is not enough, it turns to tokenization, and also that we have to end with the notion of a sum-zero game. So that why would people feel threatened, coming back to Alex's point? It's because if there's 10 places and women are fighting for half, that means that I will be excluded. We need to build bigger pies. We just need to make sure that those bigger pies are distributed differently.
Yeah.
And that, just closing the argument, is not every man that has ever seated on a board in McKinsey at Gonzalez Calvillo
No.
is the brightest. But he got there, he had a role, he will go. That happens in all organizations, but giving this space for other diverse people brings things to the table, even if they are wrong, even if they are subpar. So just wanted to make that point to counter Jose Ignacio's point that there are quotas, and a lot of people believe in them. What's wrong with thinking that? So I think that there's two sides to it.
Of course, there's two sides to it. And the last thing that I'll say about this, unless, of course, there are more questions, is that the fact that we don't believe in quotas does not mean that we say just stand still and then it solves itself. Of course, you have to do many things in order to level the playing field, but again, not being the quotas, or at least from our standpoint, not quotas. And let me give you an example. If we do not create, for example, blind resume reviews, like you will tend to get resumes from males more than you will get from females, because that's the way it is, because we have teams of HR departments and so on that have to pick the resumes that you're going to see, and we have biases ourselves, like even, again, unconscious biases that when I review a resume, then I'm going to end up giving you the 5 resumes of a guy and then 1 resume of a woman. So what is the probability of that woman being the brightest? Well, there is some probability, but I'm telling you it's not going to be a level playing field. So what do some companies do in order to change that? They make human department, the human resources department, to say, you have to bring me 10 resumes, and 50% of them have to be women, and by the way, you have to blindfold who's the man and who's the woman. Because then I truly only look at what are the skills of the person that I'm trying to recruit. And by the way, they have equal chance, because I say 50-50, equal chance of hiring a woman that I have a man. So those are things that we absolutely encourage people to do and companies to do, absolutely. Because if we keep the way that we're doing things, then we will have the pace of progress that I just told you about. So of course, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing things. Like, we proactively need to do very aggressive things like the one that I just told you, but that does not mean that I'm going to choose or I'm going to recruit the woman for the mere fact of being a woman. Actually, the technique that I just told you is a way that you can absolutely make sure that you're going to recruit the best talent, period. It doesn't matter whether it's a man or it's a woman.
You want to go
Okay. Good. So, of course, the question, at least the most important question for me when I saw this was, well, what can we do to accelerate this? Like, of course, yeah, this is frustrating and this is very bad news and so on, but truly, what can we do as organizations to change this? And we're really going to get to that question, but let me make a small parenthesis on the pandemic. Like, the most important thing that has happened to us in the past 3 years, the pandemic, right? Because all the data that I just showed you was without considering the effects of the pandemic. And as you all know, probably, and I have data to support it, but it more than proportionally hurt women than it hurt men, from the workforce standpoint, right? So let's do a small parenthesis on that. I'll answer any questions that you have, and then we'll go back to the topic of what can we do about this. So, first of all, let's all recognize that the pandemic had a huge effect on both men and women on the workforce. Like, nobody can deny that. So what we have on top is what was let's say, the participation rate, workforce participation rate of men, and then down below on women. As you can see, of course, there was a very steep decline on both the participation of men and women. The difference here, and you can actually not fully appreciate it with the graph, but I can tell you the data. The difference of this is that men recovered to pre-pandemic numbers 6 months into the pandemic. 6 months into the pandemic, they were at 95% what the participation rate was before the pandemic. For women, that took 2 years. 2 years to fully recover. And I say fully, we are at 90% what we used to be before the pandemic. But it took full 2 years to go there. So in Mexico, during the first year of the pandemic, from March 2020 to March 2021, there were 1.7 million jobs that were lost. Of those, 85% were women. And of those, 90% were women with children. So of course, there's a huge relationship between what happened and the fact of being a woman and the fact of being a mother. Because you all, I mean, I'm sure all of you saw it, if you're a woman and if you are a man. Like, schools were shut down, some domestic help was not available, and all of a sudden, all the increased workload that we had at home, both for taking care of the home and the children, was being bared by women. I mean, of course, some men, and hopefully we have a few of those here, but some men, it helped them to be more involved with their children and with the house care and so on. But it is true that women more than proportionally absorbed that excess workload. So, and to tell you to what extent did that happen, this graph tells us what is the distribution of the excess workload in a household where both men and women work. And we have like a ranking of all the different countries. Well, Mexico is number 23 out of 25 countries. So before the pandemic, women already dedicated 3x the time that men did to, again, childcare and home care. After the pandemic, that more than doubled. So it's almost 7x the amount of time that men dedicate to this type of work. So of course, if you think about it, like if all of a sudden you had to do like 7 times what you did at home, then that explains why out of the 1 million jobs that were lost, more than 85% of those were women. Well, yes, because you could not do 3 shifts. Like we're used to doing 2 shifts, well, this meant 3 shifts. We can't do that. So,
Valentina, I think that's very important with respect to the pandemic is not only home care and child care, but elderly care.
Yeah.
That was a very important
Also.
part of this, that
Also.
women were devoting a lot of time to take care of grandma and grandpa. So a lot of the time was taking care that older senior adults at home were taken care of. And that fell disproportionately on women, not only of their own mothers and parents, but their husband's mother or father.
That's true.
So that made it much worse, and that elder care is going to become a much bigger issue in societies where the population is getting older, including Mexico. So women are having fewer children, but they still have 2 parents. Men are having fewer children, but they still have 2 parents each.
Yeah.
So now we all will have to take care of more older adults than of babies, and it's going to fall again more on women than on men, and that was really stressed during the pandemic, that the most vulnerable people were elders taken care of by women.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that, because yes, I only mentioned the childcare and the just home
Household
care,
too.
house care, but it is true that it is also, because then when we saw the correlation between the age, let's say, of the women leaving the workforce, then of course there was a huge skew towards younger women who have younger children, but at some point it also became like older women who no longer have younger children,
Babies.
but they do have elderly parents. So that's a good point. So what happened then? If like all of a sudden I have to absorb all of that excess workload, then what we have here is it really hurt the emotional stability and the emotional, let's say, health of both men and women. But as you can see in this graph, it is always the case that women resented it more than men. So in terms of feeling tired, feeling stressed, burnout, having to carry with the responsibilities at home. So again, this data is just to show that it is true not only that we were leaving the workforce at a higher rate than men, but that had a reason to it, which is we were really feeling, let's say, more stressed and more tired than men on this topic. The final slide on this topic is, of course, that all of this that I'm telling you about led for more women to, because a lot of the works that were lost that I told you before were layoffs. Yes, that's true. But a lot of those were voluntary exits from the workforce. And the reason for that is because if I feel stressed, if I can no longer take care of my parents, of all my children, of my house, then I start thinking about whether I want to stop my professional career or take a temporary break or deaccelerate my career. So again, both genders had this feeling, but as you can see, in each and every case, women had this feeling or thought about this exit strategies more than men did. So sorry for the parenthesis, but I thought it was very important because the numbers that I told you, again, were without considering the pandemic. So if we were to factor in this into the numbers that I gave you, maybe we would be talking about more than the 100 years that I said, which takes us back to the big question, which is, what can we do to accelerate change? So we're going to be talking about the next few slides. So first, this is the same corporate funnel that I presented a few slides back. Right? We start with the 40% in the entry level, and we go down to the 10% at the CEO level. But then we added two lines to this funnel. And the reason why we did that is because this funnel is the average of many things. But we said, is there truly not, amongst these 120 companies, somebody that is doing it better than others? Somebody that has like a recipe on how to do this better. So we started running correlations, and we saw that, yes, there are differences in these companies. So what we have on the graph on top, on the white line, is the 22 companies that are in the first quintile of gender diversity. And as you can see, they have better numbers of percentage of women in each and every level of the corporate ladder, even though it follows, generally speaking, if we keep out the CEO part, but generally speaking, the same trend of going down or let's say declining as you go up on the ladder. In all of the cases, you have significantly better numbers of women representation in each of the different levels. What we have in the other graph, in the blue line, those are the 23 companies that are in the last quintile of women representation. And as you can see, they are significantly worse than the average. So we start, for example, in entry level with 24% women. That is almost 3 times less than what we have on average in Mexico of men. So 60% when we talk about of men, when we talk about the average, and then 24% women on the last quintile. So, of course, one looks at this graph, and it urges the question of, what are these companies doing? Like, if we're truly about talking companies that access the same talent pool, that live the same biases that we have in Mexico, that have the same complexities that we have in Mexico, what explains the fact that some of them can do significantly better than others? And that's what we started studying. But before I tell you what are those, let me reintroduce a framework that we used in our previous study that talks about the 5 dimensions that, in McKinsey's view, can contribute to a gender diversity. And those we, let's say, baptized it as CLIMB for its acronym. But let me tell you what are those dimensions. So first of all, it's C for commitment. And this means commitment with the topic of gender diversity at the top. This means CEO, board, and so on. With all due respect to the area's human resources departments, this cannot be something that it's delegated to those departments. This has to be sitting side to side to the strategy committee, to the risk committee, like to the most important committees and the most important topics that we have, unless we provide or we give that priority, that commitment to the topic, then it will not change. That's number 1. Number 2 is leadership development. We were already talking about that with Christina. So by leadership development, I mean not technical skills, not teaching women technical skills, because we are equally equipped with skills than men are. But it's true that we are not as used as men to be the boss. Like, really, we are not used to be the boss. Historically, we are not in that place. And it requires some skills. And what has been happening for a few years now is that women who are leaders tend to mirror the style of leadership of men. And that is not always a good idea, because there's a lot of research, not only by McKinsey, but again from Harvard Business Review and so on, that say that women who have the same character traits than men tend to be regarded as aggressive, impolite, and so on. So I'm not saying that we should create a better, let's say, a better model of leadership. I'm just saying a different one. We only know one, which is how to be a male leader. So what if we need to do other types of leader? Have to be a female leader, have to be a gay leader, have to be a whatever leader you want to be. We only have one way to be. So what I mean by this, let's say, dimension is, how do we teach women to create their own paradigm of leadership? Then the third I stands for infrastructure, and that means all the policies and processes that need to be in place in order to recruit, retain, and develop women. Right? So here we have things like paternity leave, maternity leave, work from home, flexible time, and so on. So all of those that we as companies need to put in place in order to keep women in the workforce. Then M stands for metrics and KPIs. So unless we measure where we stand in terms of salary gap, in terms of promotion rates, we're not going to be able to pinpoint where we need to work the most. So and then the last one, which is in my mind like the most complicated one, is behaviors and mindset. So how do we change the DNA of who we are as a culture, as a country? And how do we change the idea that if you're a woman, you have to stay home taking care of the baby, and if the baby cries, then you have to run for the baby instead of the husband? So how do we do that? Anyway, those were, in its moment, the 5 dimensions that we used. What we did this time around is that we reused this framework. And out of these 120 companies, we researched and we created an inventory of what are the different initiatives that these companies are working on. And we came up with a little bit more of, I believe, 50 unique initiatives that these companies are working on. And we classified those in one of these 5 dimensions. And then we saw, how do they rank? Like if we look again to the quintiles that I was showing you before, how do they rank in terms of the program when we compare it to the CLIMB framework? And what we saw is that, so this line, the lighter blue line, is the companies in the first quintile. So what we can see is not only they have a better score, let's say, of their initiatives, because they are closer, let's say, to the outer part of the spider chart, but it looks that it is fairly balanced amongst the 5 dimensions, right? There's no particular dimension that we see it's lacking. Versus when we look at the last quintile, so the darker blue line, where we see not only do they have less number of initiatives in all of the dimensions, but it's actually less balanced. Like the 2 dimensions that they hurt the most are commitment and infrastructure. So those were 2 characteristics that we thought, well, this is interesting. But we thought, well, 50 initiatives is too much. Isn't there a subgroup of initiatives that could explain why companies in the first quintile have better numbers in terms of gender diversity than the rest of the companies? And we found that yes, there is a correlation. And there are 17 out of those 50 that we call differentiators. Initiatives that can truly make a difference in terms of the numbers that you have in terms of gender diversity. And those 17 fall within the first dimensions that I was telling you before. So commitment, leadership development, and infrastructure. One clarification is that the fact that the other 2 dimensions are not here does not mean that those other 2 dimensions are not important. I was telling you in the previous slide that one of the characteristics of the first quintile companies are that they have a very balanced climb in all dimensions. So that's not what it means. The only thing it means is that those 2 dimensions have become almost like a standard in Mexico. Like most companies implement initiatives around metrics, and most companies implement initiatives around behaviors and mindsets with unconscious bias trainings, with messaging to the employees and so on. But that is almost like a standard. If we're truly thinking about what can make a difference, then there would be 17 companies that fall within these first 3 dimensions. So very quickly, because I do want to have some time for Q&A. Yeah, let me watch. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, very quickly, I'm going to tell you which are those 17. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to pinpoint some of them. But in the first dimension of commitment, we have 7 initiatives. And let me click so that you can see the full thing to tell you what the slide says. So in the first column, we have what is the percentage of companies of the first quintile that implement those initiatives. And then on the second column, what is the percentage of companies in the last quintile that implement those same initiatives? So 2 things are important about this. First one is, as you can see, these initiatives, these 7 initiatives, are implemented either by 50% or 3/4 of the population of the first quintile. So they are very largely implemented in this group. The second thing that is important is that when we look at the, let's say, difference of these initiatives being implemented in last quintile, the difference is huge. We're talking about that in most cases it's like 3x the difference, and in some cases, like the last initiatives, we're talking about 14x the difference, right? So that is what led us to believe, well, if it's truly this way, then these initiatives are the ones that can make a difference in a company. And I'll pinpoint some of them. So we were talking about diversity committee. Yes, we already said that. But I also said you have to be careful on how you, the configuration of this committee. If we put in that committee only people from human resources department and talent department, and there's nobody senior on that committee that sits in that committee that provides the same level of seniority and importance to it than the risk committee, the finance committee, and so on, then it will not change. You have to provide resources, by the way. Like we have that 9 out of 10 companies on this group provide not only like financial resources, but human resources to actually do this. This cannot be, and Cristina and I have talked about this topic a lot, but this cannot be your side job. You cannot have your hat on of, I am the, let's say, McKinsey partner on energy, but I'm also the leader of diversity. Like, unless we do this and truly recruit from some talent that is dedicated and devoted to this topic, then it is always going to be my second job. So anyway, that was one call out.
Sorry, Valentina, just for everybody to know, our diversity committee is formed by 3 partners, okay. 2 of them the female partners, which represent 100% of the female partnership. Yeah. But the third other partner is one of our managing partners, so that he is the most important link to the resources that we need to fund many of the ideas and initiatives, and we didn't have a good interlocution with the managing partners, then we could be making proposals but never get the money for them. And the 4th member is one of our female of counsel from the firm. But the whole group works constantly to make sure with our HR department and our management, our manager, to make sure that these initiatives can actually come true after being funded and after being discussed. Yep. Then you still, from the check to the actual maternity nursery room that we have now, or to the actual bringing a speaker and paying for this or whatever, there's still room to be made. So that we have tried to show the diversity not only with respect to the seniority, but also to having a hand in the firm's pocket and the other hands in people that can actually make those things happen. So I think that's important for everybody to get to know. Perfect. That we have shown that commitment.
Perfect, thank you for sharing that. And then I'll call out another 2 initiatives on this page. So first is the clear quantitative objectives, because that is very different from the quotas that we were mentioning before. Again, I already said we're not pro quotas, but what we think is that unless we have objectives of how many women do we plan to have, in which level, by what time, then everything is going to keep the same. Like the same as we, as all companies do, I want to have this growth rate. I want to increase this number of clients in my portfolio. And that is always an objective. Why are we not putting objectives on how many women do we want to have on each of our steps of the ladder? Like we should have that as an aspiration. Unless there is an aspiration, then I believe things will not change. And then the last one that I'll call out is the last one, which is requiring at least, which goes back to the topic that we were mentioning before, requiring at least 1 female candidate in all recruiting processes. Because again, unless you bring to the table the resume, then the talent of that woman is not going to be able to be judged. Maybe she doesn't win it, and that's okay. But at least we provide the same level of opportunity that men have. So that's the other one that I'll call out on this page. On the second dimension, which is leadership development, we have 3 initiatives. And I'll focus on one, which is the sponsorship program, because it's an interesting one. If you can see, this is the one that, when compared to the other ones that we were mentioning, is very, the implementation rate, even in the first quintile companies, is very small, right? Only 1 in 5 companies implements this initiative in the first quintile versus no company in the last quintile. So this is one of the reasons why we kept this one. Not because it is very implemented in the first quintile companies, but because the difference it has with the companies that are in the last quintile where no company implements it. But the other reason is, again, we have other research, not in Women Matter, but in other McKinsey research about gender parity, that this is one of the most effective initiatives that you can have. And I can give you a few numbers. The reason for that is women who have, or companies where women have sponsors, have 25% more senior women in senior positions, that's one. They have 20% more probabilities of being promoted than companies that do not have sponsorship programs for women. And third, if you are a mother, you are a woman and you are a mother, you are less likely to exit the workforce if you declare to have at least one sponsor in your company. Yes?
What's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor?
Thank you for that question, Has. So, the difference is that a mentor is somebody that provides guidance, right? Like you go to and ask for guidance, and they provide with some help in terms of, yeah, you should think about this your career this way and that way. So it's almost advice, somebody that you go for advice. And it's very important, so don't, like, maybe the tone that I was saying was trying to minimize the importance of it. No, it's really important. Like, having mentors is a really important thing. But the difference with sponsors is that sponsors are truly people who go out of their way to make an opportunity for you. So the typical example that we give is, like, a mentor, like, invites you to get a coffee. The sponsor invites you to a meeting. Like, they really create opportunities for you in teams, in creating and broadening your exposure, in having you, like, present, like, they introduce you to people that are important for your career and so on. So that's what we mean by sponsor. Is that
in our world, that would be like, for example, a partner that can help you make partners, so that you know that if you're somebody's project, and that makes it more, but because he or she will take you to meetings, introduce you to people. And mentorship, actually, González Calvillo is a part of several mentorship programs where we go literally to school to be taught to be mentors, and many of our associates are mentees in different programs. We're in the 30% Club in AmCham, in Abogadas MX, that are mentorship programs. But having a sponsor is like having un padrino, somebody that speaks for you, that pushes your career, that in every meeting where there's, for example, a compensation meeting, they will speak for you, and they will say, Jacinto has been doing this and that, and we should take this into account. So it's a huge difference, as Valentina was saying, taking you out for coffee and saying, have you read this book? This would be useful. Have you practiced these skills? As somebody speaking up for you and saying, he should come to this trip, he should make the presentation. And this is very important because, as Valentina pointed out before, there's a lot of very casual sponsorship relationships within firms. And actually with women, sometimes they need extra effort because women, because of their caring duties and everything else that we talked, go less to the social events, to the big meetings. And there's this bias to say, Jane, can you please do the presentation? Can you present to the public? So that all these things where we tend to give women unpaid or unnoticeable labor, whereas when you have to speak to the client, let's bring, in this same example, Jacinto to speak to the client, whereas the women were working on your very nice presentation. That is the type of things that make a huge difference in how are you mentored, but also how are you sponsored to get somewhere.
Perfect. And then the last one would be on the infrastructure dimension. We have another 7 initiatives. And I'll pinpoint just a few of them. So the first 2 have to do with having a better work-life balance, right? It's just like, what are companies doing to have a better work-life balance? And the first one, which is work from home, now everybody was using it because of the pandemic. But the interesting part is that I am seeing, at least in some of my clients, that we are, as a society, organically going back to where we were before pandemic without capitalizing in some of the learnings of the pandemic. I believe some of the most important learnings of the pandemic was we can actually do our work from home. Like, we don't need to be sitting in the office all the time. And notwithstanding that fact, companies are just saying, come back to work. And everybody is supposed to be sitting in their place doing their job. If we do that as a society, we are not going to be capitalizing on some of the few, there were, but some of the few benefits of the pandemic. So anyway, those were one. The next 3 have to do with being a better company to work for if you are a mother or a father. So it has to do with having access or subsidies for daycare or childcare. The second one has to be to have extended paternity leaves and then extended maternity leaves. An important one to call out again, and we talked about this topic, is paternity leaves, because not only is this happening already in 2/3 of the companies when we talk about the first quintile versus only 1 in 5 when we talk about the last quintile, but it is also very relevant to see how the difference in terms of the number of days, extra days that these companies give. So companies in the last quintile, even though it's only 1 in 5, when they say we give extra days beyond what the law says, in average they give 6 extra days. The average of extra days in the companies of the first quintile are 60 days, 60 days, extra days. So it's not only that that companies who are in the first quintile are giving this benefit more, let's say, than the companies that are in the last quintile, but that they are giving a lot more extra days than the companies that are in the last quintile. And then the last two have to do with having objective evaluation processes, because it is not going to help anybody if you don't change the system that you work for. If you keep evaluating people by saying, how many deals have you done, and then that person, that woman, was in a maternity leave, all of a sudden we are gonna penalize that woman for being away for the mere fact of being away. So unless we change and we say, why is it important the number of deals you made? Why don't we use another KPI to understand how successful this woman or this man is? And then, unless you change those systems, then it's not going to be impactful. And I'll finish with this slide. And sorry that we're running a little bit over because I really wanted
we've
to
had a lot of the questions have been asked during,
good.
So we're good.
But this is the very last slide, which is, I just want to be super clear that this is not a magic one, right? It's not like all of a sudden, oh, perfect, McKinsey gave us a recipe of the 17 initiatives, let's just go ahead and put them on and then everything will solve for it. No, that will not be the case. It is truly important how much effort you put into how do you implement these initiatives. It goes all the way from, again, the commitment and the responsibility not only of the areas of human resources and so on, but even the operational areas. Like we have cases of companies that wanted to implement a particular initiative, and when they talked to their operational areas, they said, we cannot do that. We cannot work from home if we work in a manufacturing plant, for example. So how do we make sure that we take those things into consideration? So that's one. Having an effective communication. Like if you don't communicate to your employees that you can take this or that other benefit, and that, by the way, you're not going to be penalized in an evaluation committee if you decide to take that benefit, then people are not going to take it. And we have so many examples of companies out, yeah, I have paternity leaves, and look at my data, nobody has ever used it. Yeah, of course, because the poor guy who used it, like back in 2017, was fired or whatever. Then, I mean, it's not working. Then continuous monitoring, I already said, unless we measure, then we will not be able to pinpoint what are the things that we need to work on. And then finally, having an inclusive culture, right? Like if we have all the initiatives in place, we communicate them well, and then we have the bosses on top, just working all the time, not taking paternity leaves, calling their teams in the middle of the night, then that role modeling is not going to be there, and then people are not going to be, or are not going to feel comfortable in taking any of these benefits. So with that, let me close, and thank you for the invite. I urge you, if you are excited about this topic, to download the full report that we have on womenmattermx.com. And hopefully the message today that I would like to leave you with is, yes, we have a lot to work on, and we are very frustrated about the lack of progress in the past 5 years, but at least I'd like to see that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel if we focus in the right set of initiatives.
Thank you very much, Valentina. I want to make a final comment from our side. Thank you. But we haven't finished.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because We want to get Valentina's thoughts on a point of effective communication and inclusive culture. I think there's a lot that leadership can do, but effective communications goes bottom, top too. Companies need to know what their talent needs and wants. So effective communications is finding the right ways, not only for us to put the information out there, but to get feedback, to say, I'm pretty sure that if we run right here a test about all of our policies, not all of us will know what we have in place. Not everybody has deep dived into our website to read our policies, to read our code of ethics, to read, and a lot of them have not gotten back to us to say, why am I working in a firm that doesn't have this? So that we can say, oh yes, we have it. You just, maybe we didn't let you know. But so how do you think not only top bottom, but bottom up the communication, and also with respect to the inclusive culture, what are the interventions that you find more effective to make all of our teams get involved? Because many of these issues are not easy for everyone. There's a lot of pushback with specific initiatives and with the philosophy behind many of these initiatives. So it is true that there's, as Alex was mentioning, a bit of pushback, but also a lot of misunderstanding of saying women matter means that men don't matter, women matter mean that women want to do or sit in the places that were reserved for men. How do you feel that we can get closer to our staff and our legal staff as well, and the younger staffs, to make them part of that culture and make them part of the communication?
Yeah, thank you for those. So let me start with the first one. I think it goes back to the sponsorship topic, right? Like, unless you feel comfortable going and talking to, the partners that you feel comfortable with, but in trying to understand, like, what are some of the things that I could or could not do? What are some of the benefits that you have, or like the policies that you have in place that I could benefit from? Because sometimes, and I'm sure that is the case, having two women partner, but it is the case in McKinsey, I can speak about myself as well, is that we don't have a role model, like, to look at. Like, it's not that the policy is not in place, but nobody has done it before. So you don't even know how it looks like. So, and not even men know how it looks like, right? So it's about really engaging in a thought partnership with your partners, and with the partners that you work with, in trying to understand not only what are some of the things that you could do, that you could benefit from, or things that you are struggling with, like if you are a woman and you want to have a family, but this is not a good time of the career, or if you're a man and you are struggling in getting a new sponsor, like, what are some of the things that the company provides? But that's only the first layer. The second layer is, how do I make it happen if I have not seen somebody do it before me? Like, how do we engage in this partnership to make a strategy on how to make it work better? So it's a little bit of, maybe it's a wishy-washy kind of answer, but it's truly just having those conversations with your sponsors. Now, to the second question, I think it's a very relevant one. And honestly, there's no like a silver bullet on how to go about it. But what we try to do sometimes in McKinsey is that we run very often internal surveys. Internal surveys on what is the sentiment in terms of diversity and inclusion. Not only that, but also, for example, on sponsorship. We have surveys that we say, please, like, include in this list the people who you believe are your sponsors, and then we ask the sponsors to do the same thing. Like, please put down on this list the people who you believe are your sponsorees. You wouldn't imagine the richness of the data that we receive, because there's a huge mismatch of people thinking, I am sponsoring you, and then thinking, no, you're not my sponsor. And what? So you are missing out on the opportunity of having this like incredible partner helping you because you didn't think about him or her in that way. So the only way goes back to gathering information. And sometimes people feel more comfortable doing it in a survey, sometimes you could do it in a town hall, so whatever works for you and the culture of González Calvillo, but truly it is about gathering data to try to be very surgical in terms of what are some of the interventions that you want to do.
Do you have any advice, particularly for our male associates and male partners and councils, on how to be an ally and a sponsor of these matters and still be cool? Because I think that part of the problem is that people that are pushing against current, the status quo, have also their own pushback, and there's a lot of, we can't joke anymore, now we can't say anything, the parties are not as fun, now excessive drinking is frowned upon because there's all these sexual harassment potential accusations, I can't defend women without becoming harassed myself. How can we engage people to be part of this movement and still keep their social capital, I would call it. Do you have any thoughts of that? Have you seen that at McKinsey?
That's a hard question, but the way that I think about it is, I mean, and again, it might be like not a very technical answer, but it's like I urge you, and this is male and females, to conduct yourself in the way that you'd like people who are with your daughters and with your sons to conduct. Like if you think I would hate to somebody in my team or in a team to tell this or say this to my daughter or to my son, then you probably shouldn't do it yourself. And it's not about being less fun. It's about being ethical. It's about being, like, behaving on the way that people should behave. So again, maybe it's not like a very technical, but it's what can you do? Well, whenever you're about to say something, whenever you're about to do something, say, would I feel comfortable if anybody in my daughter or my son's team did this or say this? If the answer is no, then just don't do it.
Yeah, we need to think about something for the younger crowd because many of them don't have kids, but we'll keep thinking on how to keep engagement.
But even then, right? Like I remember like a few conversations that I had with like very like analysts in McKinsey who are like freshly, let's say, out of school. And even they can relate to, oh no, I wouldn't like that to be the case. Like even they don't have children, they can absolutely like see right from wrong.
Yeah,
right?
empathy doesn't come with bearing children.
Exactly.
Empathy should be something more general. But yeah, I think that empathy is a clue. And we really thank Valentina. We do not have time for more questions, but we really want to thank you. There was a lot of interaction during time. But we all, if you have questions or messages for Valentina, please feel free to let me know, and we'll invite Valentina again, at least for one of our Zooms or something, for her to answer more questions. We will distribute the Women Matter study to everyone. Make sure that you have it. So if you have questions, we'll invite Valentina once again to one of our Zooms or any other physical events. And thanks for everyone for your questions and for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
A thriving law firm is about great achievements, a deep understanding of all legal issues, an excellent group of lawyers. We know that. But what defines us goes beyond what we do. It's about how we do it. We create an environment of which we are proud. We work hard, learn, share, make friends. We grow individually and collectively. That's why we're cooler than the others. It's about living the challenger spirit inside out. It's about people bringing different ideas and points of view, being committed to finding the best solution for each case, having clients at the core of all decisions we make. We are adaptable to the business demands while having integrity and fairness as guides to every relationship. We are teammates who believe that collaboration takes us further and who work together every step of the way. But, most of all, what sets us apart is the desire to be part of something greater, to challenge the status quo and evolve the legal practice. That's how we build the future every day. That's how we help change the face of law, one matter at a time. González Calvillo, meet new standards.